Madison needs a studio for her brand, not a roommate. My father didn't even stand up to say it. He just sat there, swirling his expensive wine, while I stood in the doorway, holding 2 luxury cruise tickets I had bought for them. She is actually doing something with her life, Jeffrey continued, his voice bored. I looked past him at my childhood bedroom. It was gutted. The walls were dripping with fresh neon pink paint. My desk had been replaced by ring lights. My entire life was stuffed into 3 black garbage bags. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. I didn't scream. I didn't demand an explanation. In my line of work, when a contract is breached, you don't argue with the person who broke it. You simply execute the exit clause. I placed the envelope with the cruise tickets gently on the mahogany hall table. It was a $5,000 symbol of a vacation they had just forfeited. I picked up my 3 garbage bags and walked straight back out into the freezing Portland rain without saying a single word. The silence was a down payment on the piece I was about to buy. I walked to my car, a high-end luxury SUV worth $75,000. My parents always called it a rolling eyesore. They saw the mud on the tires and the nondescript gray wrap I'd put over the factory paint, and they assumed it was a salvaged wreck. To them, I was a failure who couldn't even afford a decent sedan. They didn't know I kept it looking rugged on purpose. It was camouflage. In the world of high-stakes finance, if people see the shark coming, they hide the blood. I preferred to move in the shadows. I drove through the blinding sleet until I found a motel with a flickering neon sign. The heater in the room rattled like a dying lung, blowing lukewarm air against my frozen hands. It was perfect. It was a stark contrast to the multi-million-dollar mansion I had been subsidizing for the last 4 years. I pulled my tablet from my bag. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the small, dingy room. They thought I fixed printers for a living. They thought I was a frugal coder who was lucky they let me sleep in the guest room. They were wrong. I am a lead auditor and a financial fixer for venture capital firms. I am the person they send in when a company is bleeding money and the numbers don't add up. I find the rot and I cut it out. Last year, my base income was $1,200,000. I could have bought their house in cash 10 times over, but I didn't. I paid them rent instead. Let them believe I was their personal ATM because it was safer than letting them know the true depth of my pockets. If they knew what I was worth, they wouldn't just ask for rent. They would butcher me. I opened my offshore banking portal. My eyes tracked the automated payments I had set up months ago. $600 for the mansion's landscaping. $400 for the high-speed fiber internet Madison used for her vapid live streams. $300 for the premium security system. I hovered my finger over the screen. One by one, I clicked cancel. Jeffrey and Stephanie were about to find out that the dead weight they just evicted was actually the only thing keeping their lights on. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel regret. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a single tear. But there was only clarity. This wasn't a family breakdown. It was a balance sheet. And for the first time in 29 years, I was bringing the Miller accounts to zero. I sat on the edge of the lumpy motel bed, the smell of stale cigarettes and cheap disinfectant clinging to the air. The cold from the window seeped into my bones, a physical reminder of the night I had just endured. But the ice in my heart had been there much longer. It started in 1999. My father called it the $10 million mistake. Jeffrey was 26 then, standing on the edge of a career-making deal. He had a bid scheduled that would have set us up for life. But that morning, I was 2 years old and burning with a fever of 104. I had a febrile seizure. Jeffrey had to miss the bid to drive me to the emergency room. He didn't see a daughter in pain. He saw a liability that had just cost him a fortune. For 25 years, that narrative was the wallpaper of my life. Every birthday, after the candles were blown out, he would look at me with that hollow, resentment-filled stare and say that I was starting life with a negative balance. He didn't raise a child. He managed a bad investment. That resentment eventually matured into what I called the parasite tax. From the moment I turned 16 and got my first job at a coffee shop, my paychecks were essentially garnished. Jeffrey and Stephanie called it interest on the debt I owed them for my existence. I wasn't allowed to save. I wasn't allowed to plan. I was the silent investor in their version of family, footing the bill for Madison's lifestyle. Madison was the asset. I was the overhead. When she wanted to be a model, I paid for her headshots. When she decided to be an influencer, my mother told me it was my duty to pay for her lip fillers and spa days. They said Madison needed to look the part to marry rich. They drained me dry, month after month, telling me I should be grateful they didn't evict me sooner. Why did I stay? Why didn't a woman making over $1 million a year just walk away? People who haven't lived in the shadows of emotional abuse don't understand the invisible chains of the survivor. It was a prison without bars. When you are told from the age of 4 that you are a failure, you stop looking for the exit. You start believing the ledger is right. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and I had been too well trained in guilt to notice the bankruptcy of their love. I had been living in a state of learned helplessness, a hostage to a debt that didn't exist. I had been paying rent on my own childhood home while they treated me like a trespasser. I was the fixer who could save global corporations from collapse, but I couldn't save myself from the lie that I was a burden until tonight. Tonight, the contract was null and void. The interest was paid in full. I reached into my bag to pull out my work tablet, the matte black device that held the encrypted keys to my entire career. My hand closed around empty air. The bag was light, far too light. My stomach dropped so hard, I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. I dumped the contents onto the motel duvet, chargers, a spare hard drive, and a tangle of cables. But the machine, containing algorithms worth millions, was gone. I didn't panic. Panic is for people who don't have a plan. I grabbed my phone and opened the tracking app. I watched the little blue dot ping. It wasn't at my parents' house. It was 3 miles away, blinking steadily at a location on 5th Street. Easy, cash pawn, and loan. I drove there in a fugue state, the Portland rain, turning to a gray, miserable slush against my windshield. Inside the shop, the air smelled like dust and desperation. I showed my identification to the man behind the glass and gave him the serial number. He didn't even look up from his magazine. I cannot give it to you without the ticket, he said. Store policy. Or you can file a police report and wait 3 weeks. I ran back to my car and dragged out the 3 black garbage bags Jeffrey had thrown at me. I tore them open in the parking lot, my hands shaking in the freezing wind. I dug through my clothes and old books until I found it. A crumpled yellow slip of paper wadded up inside a pair of jeans. Stephanie hadn't just packed me up, she had looted me. I walked back inside, smoothed the receipt on the counter, and paid $800 to buy back my own property. $800. I later found out that was the exact cost of Madison's new lip fillers. I sat in the front seat of my car, hugging the cold metal of the tablet to my chest, when the second notification hit my phone. It was an email from the Department of Motor Vehicles, a notice of transfer of liability. I stared at the screen. My SUV, the vehicle I had bought with cash but kept in Jeffrey's name to save on insurance premiums, had been sold an hour ago. He had sold my $75,000 SUV for $30,000 in cash to a shady wholesaler. I called Stephanie. She answered on the second ring, sounding annoyed, as if I were a telemarketer. You stole my tablet, I said, my voice clinical, and Jeffrey sold my car. I didn't steal anything, Stephanie snapped. We raised you, Grace. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. Consider that money a small repayment on the debt you owe us. Besides, Madison's launch party needed a chocolate fountain and stage lights. You can always buy another car. You are single. You have fewer expenses. She told me it was just interest for the 18 years they let me breathe the air in their house before she hung up. I sat there in the silence of the parking lot. The heater wheezed, the sleet fell, and something inside me finally snapped shut. It wasn't a break, it was a locking mechanism. I wiped the last tear I would ever shed for them off my cheek. I opened my laptop and the screen glowed to life. I stopped being Grace, the daughter who wanted to be loved. I became Grace, the auditor, the fixer, the woman who dissects rot for a living. I didn't need to cry anymore. I needed to run the numbers. I didn't sleep. Sleep is for people who have time to waste, and I was on a deadline. The motel room was freezing, the heater having given up hours ago, but the cold kept me sharp. I sat at the small desk, my recovered tablet humming, a sound that felt like a heartbeat returning to a chest. It was time to audit the books. I logged into my professional suite proprietary databases used to track distressed assets and high-risk liabilities. These weren't tools available to the public, they were weapons. I started with the money from my SUV. I traced the transaction. Jeffrey had listed the vehicle on a quick sale site for $30,000, a steal for the buyer and a felony for him. I followed the money trail. It didn't go toward the mortgage or the utilities. It went to a high-end party planning service to pay for the chocolate fountain and stage lights at Madison's launch party. I felt a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. They weren't just stealing from me. They were cannibalizing my life to feed Madison's ego. I dug deeper, running a comprehensive asset search on Jeffrey and Stephanie. I expected to find them struggling, but I didn't expect to find a financial corpse. They had refinanced the mansion 3 times in 5 years and maxed out 4 credit cards. Then I saw it, a notice of default filed 30 days ago. They weren't just broke, they were 30 days away from foreclosure. The house they had just kicked me out of wasn't even theirs anymore. It belonged to the bank, and the bank was coming to collect. But I needed more than just a sad story. A foreclosure is a tragedy, but it isn't leverage. I needed a crime. I picked up my phone and called Marcus, a high-profile corporate attorney who owed me an immense favor for saving his firm from a predatory audit the year before. I need a shell company, I told him. Name it Vantage Holdings. Make it look like a boutique investment firm, specializing in high-risk assets and debt consolidation. And then I need you to call my father. In my line of work, we call this the Honeypot strategy. You don't attack a desperate animal, it bites. You offer it food. You let it get comfortable. You let it think it's safe. Marcus made the call an hour later, playing the part of a representative for a silent partner, an eccentric investor named Mr. V. Marcus presented Vantage Holdings not as a bank, but as a private family office that specializes in discrete liquidity solutions for prominent families. He told Jeffrey that based on his reputation in the Portland business circles, he had been pre-approved for an exclusive, invite-only restructuring plan. It wasn't a cold call. It was a curated ego trap designed to make Jeffrey feel like a VIP being saved rather than a debtor being hunted. I monitored Jeffrey's email through the shared family server he had never bothered to remove me from. I watched the bait land. Jeffrey didn't just bite. He swallowed the hook whole. He replied within 4 minutes, gushing about his business acumen and claiming that Madison was on the brink of global stardom. He was desperate for the cash infusion to save the mansion, and his vanity was his biggest blind spot. Marcus sent over the digital contracts for a massive consolidation loan. He told Jeffrey the offer was only valid for 24 hours. Jeffrey, in his thirst for power and a quick fix, didn't even send the documents to a lawyer. He didn't read the fine print. He just saw the dollar signs and the chance to keep up appearances. He signed the papers with a flourish, thinking he had found a savior. He had no idea he had just handed the executioner his neck. I didn't sleep. The motel room was a freezer, but the adrenaline flowing through my veins was better than any space heater. I sat at the small, scratched desk, my recovered tablet humming, as I audited the documents Jeffrey had emailed to Vantage Holdings. He thought he was sending a pitch to a savior. He didn't know he was handing the executioner a map to his own gallows. I scrolled past the inflated property values and the understated debts until I hit the income section of his application. Applicant, Jeffrey Miller. Annual income, $85,000. Co-applicant, Madison Miller. Annual income, $400,000. Source, brand partnerships and digital influence. I stared at the number. $400,000. Madison didn't make $400,000. Based on my audit of her bought inflated Instagram account and the boxes of unsold t-shirts rotting in the garage, she didn't make $400. Jeffrey had lied to a federally insured institution to secure a low-interest loan. He had fabricated income to qualify for debt restructuring. That is federal bank fraud. Title 18, United States Code, Section 1344. The penalty is up to 30 years in federal prison and a $1 million fine. I saved the document and backed it up to 3 secure servers. But then Marcus called with the real kill shot. He had spent the night digging into the archived insurance and police records from 1999. He sent over a scanned PDF of a highway patrol report. I read the words, and for the first time in my life, the air in my lungs felt clean. Jeffrey didn't miss that bid because of my fever. The report showed he was arrested for a driving under the influence accident 2 hours before the meeting was supposed to start. He had crashed his car into a stationary divider while 3 times over the legal limit. He had used a 4-year-old child and a hospital visit as a shield to hide his own addiction and failure from the world for 3 decades. He had convinced me I was a $10 million mistake to cover up the fact that he was the one who had thrown it all away. I leaned back, my eyes burning. This was the ultimate proof of the illusion of power from an empty wallet. Jeffrey's entire identity, the wine, the mansion, the Miller Empire, was a rental. He had spent years building a palace made of lies and debt, using my money to pay the interest. He was so terrified of being seen as a failure that he became a criminal instead. He confused having a house with being a success. But a house is just wood and glass, and his character was nothing but air. I stopped being the daughter who wanted an apology. That Grace was dead, buried under the snow on the highway. I was the auditor now, calm, factual, and lethal. I checked the time. The boardroom meeting was in 4 hours. The trap was set. Now I just had to watch them walk into it. I arrived at Marcus's law firm an hour early. I bypassed the main lobby and took the private elevator to the executive floor. I wasn't wearing an oversized hoodie or thrift store jeans today. I walked into the conference room wearing a charcoal suit, cut like a weapon, tailored within an inch of its life. My hair was pulled back, my face was clean, and my presence was loud. Jeffrey and Stephanie were already there, dressed in their Sunday best. Jeffrey sat at the long mahogany table, swirling a glass of complimentary champagne. He looked arrogant and untouchable, the same Christmas Eve posture he'd used when he told me I was a bad investment. Madison was trailing behind them, wearing oversized sunglasses and tapping away on her phone, likely checking her latest bought-inflated metrics. When I pushed open the double doors, Jeffrey's smile froze mid-performance. Stephanie squinted, like she was trying to force reality into focus. "Grace," Jeffrey finally choked out. "How did you get past security?" "This is my daughter," he snapped at Marcus. "She's struggling. She probably tracked us down for money. Call security." Marcus didn't move. I walked to the head of the table and stood over my father. I pulled a small, crumpled yellow slip from my pocket, the pawn ticket for my tablet, and smoothed it on the polished wood. "You sold my career for $800, Stephanie. I bought it back this morning, and then I bought something else." I nodded to the screen on the wall. A property deed appeared. Address: 1402 Oakwood Drive. Current owner, Vantage Holdings Limited Liability Company. Jeffrey stared, his face turning a sick ash gray. "I am Vantage Holdings," I said evenly. "And because you defaulted on the loan terms, the second you signed them, this house is mine, right now." I tapped the remote, and the slide changed to his loan application. I pointed at the line where he claimed Madison made $400,000 a year. "You lied to a federally insured bank, Jeffrey." "That is federal bank fraud. Penalty: up to 30 years in federal prison." The room went dead quiet. "You wouldn't," he whispered, looking at me with a small, defeated desperation. "We're family." "Family doesn't throw their child out in a blizzard," I replied, the word tasting like counterfeit currency. "Family doesn't sell a daughter's livelihood for a chocolate fountain." I slid a document across the table, a deed in lieu of foreclosure. Sign this, and I keep the fraud evidence out of the hands of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Or don't, and you can spend the next 30 years in a cell. Your choice. This deed in lieu contains an immediate voluntary surrender clause. By signing, you are waiving all rights to a standard eviction process. You are no longer tenants. You are trespassers on corporate property. If you aren't out in 48 hours, I won't call a moving truck, I'll call the US Marshals to escort you straight to a federal holding cell. Fear is a stronger motivator than loyalty. Jeffrey signed, Stephanie signed. Madison just stared at her phone as her influence evaporated. Along with the funding, they had 48 hours to vacate my property. Word travels fast in a town like Portland. Jeffrey ended up greeting customers at a hardware store for minimum wage. Stephanie moved into a cramped rental she hated, and Madison started selling her designer bags online just to buy groceries. Turns out, you can't pay rent with likes. I didn't keep the house. I listed it for sale and used the proceeds to establish the Grace Foundation for Silent Survivors, a sanctuary for children who have been told their entire lives that they are a negative balance. To those of you listening who've always felt like the one at the edge, the one who never quite fit the family ledger, this is for you. You are not a bad investment. You are not a mistake or a liability. Your worth isn't determined by the people who are too small to see it. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop playing by their rules. You don't need their permission to be luminous. You just need to realize that you've been the owner of your own life all along. I walked out of that mansion for the last time, locked the deadbolt, and listened to the click. Clean, final, satisfying. I got into my car, the new one, in my name, and blocked their numbers one by one. The silence that followed was expensive, yes, but it was worth every penny. If this story resonated with you, double tap and share it with someone who needs to hear that they are enough. Don't forget to follow for more stories of justice.